So this is like my third attempt to really make this video. Third time's the charm, right? Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today I'd like to tell you a little bit about the best books that I read this year. So I was originally going to try to make some type of best and worst list combined. But the past couple of times I have tried to film this, no matter how I edit, it always ends up being like an hour-long video, and I don't want to do that to you. I know I've done that in the past, and I'd like to try to not anymore. So in the interest of time, we're just going to discuss the best books that I read, and then I will be doing a another video about the worst books that I read in 2020. So let's just get into this. So these are in no particular order, although I will admit that a couple of the books on here have honestly gone onto my favorite books of all time list as well, so that's pretty exciting. But let's just start with an actual series that ended up being the best things that I read this year, and that would be the Reluctant Royal series by Alyssa Cole. There is A Princess in Theory, A Duke by Default, A Prince on Paper, and then the two novellas, Can't Escape Love and Once Ghosted Twice Shy. The other three books, I do have them, but I've lent them to my best friend who is devouring them right now. I absolutely loved this series, and I have been having a hard time with romance novels over the past couple of years. I've ended up being very disappointed in the direction that some of them went, or the way that apparently domineering men are supposed to be something that everyone is supposed to like swoon over, and honestly, I don't appreciate that. I think it sends the wrong message to young people who are potentially picking these books up. And so, yeah, overall I've been fairly disappointed, but that changed when I read this series. I had not read Alyssa Cole's works before these books, but I can tell you I have been seeking out her other books as well since. Her writing style is just wonderful. The characters are so great. I loved every single one of them. Like, all of the characters are just well-rounded individuals, and it's not really like in a lot of romance novels where unfortunately the characters are either too perfect, and that's the big conflict, is that they're so perfect and everyone else loves them. That's really not the case in here. I mean, there's good people, but they're also very flawed people at the same time. And a wonderful thing about these romances as well is that even though they're flawed, their relationship is not so much about fixing each other with their love, but more like supporting each other with their love, and through whatever issues they are dealing with. They are also extremely timely. This discusses a lot of really timely issues that we are dealing with, like racism and immigration, and it's just such a good series. I really loved all of the characters. I do have to say, the male protagonist in the third book, I didn't so much like him when he came up in these, but as soon as I got to know him better in Prince on Paper, he did end up growing on me. I am so sorry if you are hearing background noises. The kitten has decided this is a fine time to play with her jingle ball present. So, thanks. Come on now, dude. But as I was saying, this series gave me a renewed love for romance novels, because these are just perfection. The romances are based on mutual love and respect, and it's such a great series. And she has the spin-off series Runaway Royals, and I just can't wait to dive into that as well as they come out. Another of the best books that I read last year was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is a reimagining of The Jungle Book, which you can probably tell from the title. But it was like Neil Gaiman kind of took the bare scraps, I guess, of The Jungle Book and created his own like fairy tale sort of out of it. This is just such a great book. Nobody Owens was a toddler when his family was killed, and he manages to escape into a graveyard and is then raised by a spectral couple, and has this other supernatural guardian who also resides in the graveyard. And as he grows up, he is learning how to be a spectral being while at the same time being a living, breathing boy. But meanwhile, the man who killed his biological family is still out there wanting to finish the deed. This was just overall such a great book. There's like a darkness to it. There's like a creepiness, but there's also a lot of like humor in here. The fantastical elements of the story are wonderful, and it's Gaiman. The writing is just absolutely beautiful, and the ending especially just like broke me a lot, but I really truly loved it, and this cemented it on one of my favorite books of all time list. It's just so heartwarming and a little bit heartbreaking at times as well, and honestly I really want so many people to read this that they decide to make like a stop motion movie of it, because it just honestly, it begs for that, and it is just such a wonderful book. Another of the best books that I read last year is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This deserves all of these awards and many more. This is such a beautiful book. Now, I don't think I've ever really read a book told in verse before. I have, of course, read like epic poetry, but never something quite like this, where you are basically getting the story told to you through Ziamara's poetry journal. The writing is absolutely beautiful, and lyrical, of course, is told in verse, but I can see why Elizabeth Acevedo was like a celebrated poet, because it's just phenomenal. There's so much emotion and beauty in each line, and I just really, and it was just an interesting journey watching Ziamara kind of grapple with being a young woman, and also dealing with expectations from your family, especially when it comes to religion as well, and as someone who has dealt with that and still kind of deals with that, I really connected with that, and really was touched, I guess, by, and really related to various points of this book. But such a gorgeous book, and I love it, and I can't wait to read more of her work. Another of the best books that I read was Northern Borders by Howard Frank Mosher. This was actually a reread. I read this, I think, back in like high school for a class, and I had recently picked this up again. Well, this is about Austin Tut Kittredge, who, when he is 6 years old, his mother dies, and his dad sends him to live up in Kingdom County, Vermont with his grandparents. It's like way up against the Canadian border, and this takes place throughout all of his boyhood, from 6 to about 17 or 18, in the 1940s and 50s. There's such a cast of quirky characters, ridiculous shenanigans, and this is really dealing with a look into a way of life that was dying the very like rural Vermont way of life, as changes come to the valley with electricity and various advancements that were finally reaching people far up north in the hills. And I grew up in Vermont, but I was not like raised in like a farm or anything, and honestly I didn't really get taught a lot about the rural life in the past. So this was a wonderful look at that. And I also really loved the relationship between Tut and his grandparents. It really kind of hit me extra hard in the feels, I guess, as someone who both very much misses living in Vermont and someone who very much misses their grandparents. I do have one grandpa left, and it reminds me in some ways of Tut's grandpa a little bit. But it just really kind of affected me reading that very close bond that you can have with your grandparents, especially when you have grown up so closely with them. And Mosher's writing itself is just so descriptive and beautiful. You feel like you are a part of the story. You are there experiencing all of the ridiculous events or each seasonal change, and it's such a wonderful book. I think this has taken the place of my favorite of his works, to be honest. It's such a great read. Another one of the best books that I read this year was also set in Vermont, and that is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. This is the first book in what is to be a 4-book series. They're each going through each of the seasons. This one is fall, and this follows a young girl named Ollie who's still dealing with the grief from the death of her mother about a year prior, and she reads this spooky book which features some creatures that took over this farm about 100 or so years ago. And when her class goes on a field trip to a farm, she soon realizes that is indeed the farm that is described in the creepy book she found, and now the creatures are after her and her classmates. I loved this book. This book was like something that I didn't know I needed until I was reading it. It has such an emotional punch to it. It's dealing with like grief and friendship and adventure and, you know, standing your ground. There is a lot of heart within this book. There's also a lot of creepiness in this book, and it is like a middle grade, so the creep factor isn't like Stephen King levels, but admittedly there's a couple of parts in here that creep me out a little bit, and the second book definitely creeped me out a lot more. But it's so great because it's like a mystery, but it's almost a fantasy, but it's also a horror, and it's just such a great read. There's a lot of humor in here. I love this book so much. I loved the second one, and I can't wait for the next couple. Another of the best books that I read in 2020 was They Called Us Enemy. This is a graphic novel memoir of George Takei's childhood when he and his family were taken to the Japanese internment camp, and I think War II. And this is by George Takei, of course, but also Justin Eisinger, Stephen Scott, and the art is by Harmony Becker. So this book at times was somewhat hard to read, just because it was so heartbreaking to see people, including like tons of children, get just rounded up and carted off and placed somewhere just because of how they looked and where their parents were from or where their ancestors were from. And it's just, it really was awful to see that, and to see what they went through in the camps to be treated respectfully, and to have to deal with people telling them they have to renounce a part of who they are to just prove that they are loyal Americans. And it is just also quite infuriating. The art style itself was just very nice. I mean, I guess it's kind of on the simple side, but it was cute and very charming. And this is just a very important read. I think that it is a very impactful and important read, and something that everyone should read, especially considering the past couple of years when we again have a situation where children and adults are being again rounded up and brought to specific areas in cages because of who they are. And also within the last year, when we have elected officials saying disparaging things about Asian Americans and causing them to be the victims of various hate crimes because he's a racist piece of shit that thankfully we don't have to deal with anymore. This should be like required reading for some part of schooling. It gets the message across, and it does it in a way that children could definitely understand as well. Oh, and by the way, it also does kind of address the situation of going through the same things that we are currently. So, yeah, a couple of honorable mentions books for like best reads, I guess. This is because they're sequels to other books that I have read previously. The first one of which you probably haven't heard me talk about too much because I read it back in like January or February, and that is Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. This is the second book in the City of Ghosts series. It's all about Cassidy, who had a near-death experience a while ago and is can not only kind of pierce the veil and have dealings with spirits, but she also has a ghostly best friend who's kind of attached to her as well. And she is now traveling around the world to various locations with her parents, who are making a paranormal ghost hunting kind of show. The first book took place in Edinburgh, Scotland, which, I mean, ghosts, Scotland, that's really all you need to tell me to get me hooked. This one takes place in Paris and has to do with the catacombs, which is something that both fascinates and scares the ever-living fuck out of me. This was definitely a little more creepy than the first book, but we get a little more insight into the characters. We got a little bit more of character development and learned a little bit more about this kind of spirit ability that she has. I really enjoyed this a lot. I enjoyed the contrast also of Edinburgh, which is a city that very much embraces their ghosts, to Paris, which is a city that doesn't want to fucking talk about ghosts at all. I really loved this, and I cannot wait for the third book, which is Bridge of Souls. It is coming out this year. I'm so fucking jazzed about it, and it takes place in New Orleans, and New Orleans ghosts are also something that fascinates the fuck out of me as well, and I'm so excited. This was such a good read, and I can't wait to read the other one. Another sequel that I really enjoyed this year was Wondersmith, The Calling of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This was so good. It did take me a little bit to get into it in the beginning, but once I had gotten a few chapters in, I just got sucked in as well. I enjoyed learning more about Morgan Crow and learning more about Nevermore and the Wonder Society. This one had a little bit of a darker tinge to it, I think, than the first book, but it was something that I very much enjoyed. And of course the third book came out last like November, somewhere in there. And I can't wait to read it this year because this series is just, oh, I love it. And then lastly, I'd like to mention both The Vanishing Stair and The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, which are books 2 and 3 in the Truly Devious series. I don't currently have them with me because I sent them all to my parents and told them, you have to read these, they're amazing. All you really have to say to me to get me totally hooked into a book series is unsolved mystery, Vermont setting, and quirky detective. I fucking loved that series. While I do have to say that out of the entire bunch, I think Truly Devious itself is my absolute favorite. I did really also love both The Vanishing Stair and The Hand on the Wall. So many callbacks and things from various mysteries and mystery characters that I really love, especially any references to Poirot at all, just put me over the moon. But I really enjoyed how the series really got to the heart of Vermont overall, because sometimes when you get a series and it's based in Vermont, you know, it honestly feels like it could be based anywhere in New England, and it kind of seems like the author isn't really, doesn't really know anything about it, but the series itself just was like perfectly captured like modern day Vermont just very well. I loved the characters themselves. They were kind of quirky, but quirky and funny, and while I admit that some of them, including the love interest, I wasn't particularly thrilled with, I still really enjoyed watching them on their journey, and I really loved the fact that the main character is so obsessed with true crime, especially this unsolved mystery. It's a chance to actually like try to solve it, which, as someone who is also super obsessed with true crime and has a lot of mysteries that I want to know the solution to, I found that aspect of it also awesome, and kind of a way of living vicariously through a character, I guess, on her journey to finding answers. So truly appreciated the fact that she is also dealing with anxiety, which is something that I haven't read a lot of so far in books, and I appreciated the addition of that. There's going to be a 4th book in this series, which, I mean, I know I wasn't expecting it. I don't know if anyone else was expecting it, and I'm kind of like excited, but also a little nervous about it at the same time. But yeah. For the best books that I read in 2020, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video, guys. Bye!